Alrighty, folks, welcome back to Technical Knockout, the MMA podcast. Today we are going to be talking about the Fighting Nerds coming out of Brazil. This is the team that is taking over the UFC in 2025. They were well on their way to taking it over in 2024. We're not able to realize gold by the end of the year, but several of their guys are right there, and the other few are right behind them. So we're going to cover over this awesome team that's coming out of Brazil and where they're at right now and where we think they're going to be headed in the future. So first off, in general, MMA gyms and teams have been a part of the sport since its inception, with teams like the Lion's Den, later, Kenpo Karate Club, American Top Team, Team Quest, all kinds of different fighting gyms and fighting teams. Obviously, you had guys like Chutabox in Brazil, Black House in Brazil, all kinds of, AKA American Kickboxing Academy, Greg Jackson Wink, Faraz Sahabi up in TriStar. There's been a plethora of different gyms that have taken the MMA world by storm since 1993 or whenever mixed martial arts started to become more organized. And today in 2025 or 2024, I should say, one gym has been taking the spotlight lately, and that is the Fighting Nerds coming out of Brazil. So, they're famous for wearing the nerd glasses with tape in the middle and tape on the sides, a very stereotypical nerd look. And in general, I think their philosophy is that they were nerds who started getting into fights and wanted to stop bullying, etc., etc., that whole thing. You've heard the story 15, 20 times over. But regardless of what their shtick is or what they're, what they're presenting themselves as, at the base of it, at the core of it, you have really, really talented fighters who have very interesting styles. Some of them more well-equipped than others to deal with, the well-rounded mixed martial arts game. Some of them incredibly explosive and entertaining. And what I think will be at least one champion by the end of 2025. So let's go down the list. Let's talk about the roster, so to speak. First off, let's talk about the guy who is most recently fought. That is Mauricio Ruffy. He has a very similar stance and style to Conor McGregor. A lot of people have given that comparison to him. If you watch any of his UFC fights, that's the biggest comparison that he gets a lot. He tends to lean back like Conor did a lot in his prime in that southpaw stance and explode off of guys when they come in. So he has a very similar stance and style to Conor, but I don't think he is as clean technically as Conor, and he's not, and he's much more explosive. He throws a lot weirder stuff than Conor would, whereas Conor had very clean technique that he threw with impunity. Mauricio Ruffy likes to lean back and find off-angle hooks and uppercuts to catch his guys when they're, coming into his space. So the counterpunching comparisons, the southpaw slick striker comparisons afford themselves to Conor McGregor for sure. But I think Mauricio Ruffy is a little bit more of a wild man than that. And although he's only had 2 fights in the UFC, they've both been very entertaining. So I'm excited to see where he goes from here. Next is John Silva. John Silva fights at Mauricio Ruffy fights at lightweight. John Silva fights at featherweight and lightweight. He's taken fights in both divisions so far. I believe he's 3-0 in the UFC at the moment, but he's had a couple of really incredible knockouts there. All 3 of his fights have ended by knockout. First one being against Weston Wilson, who, honestly, he should have beat, and he did. He made it look very easy. He honestly played with his food a little bit in that fight, and I remember thinking, after that, if this dude comes in a little too confident, he might get caught in his next fight. But that didn't happen. So John Silva's style, he's very low to the ground, super compact fighter. Fights at featherweight and lightweight, like I said, and just incredibly explosive guy. Throws these huge, monstrous hooks, super explosive, great power in his hands. The guy has earth-shattering power in his hands. But he does tend to get a little overzealous sometimes. I think, we've seen him swing himself out of position before. It looks like he has really good takedown defense and grappling defense, but he hasn't fought anybody that skilled to test him in that area yet, at least not in the UFC. That being said, his last two wins are knockouts over guys who rarely ever get knocked out. In the case of Charles Jourdain, has never been knocked out. So that was, huge wins against Drew Dober and Charles Jourdain. Two guys that are super tough and known to give any prospect or anybody a really hard fight. John Silva essentially walked right through them. Against Drew Dober, it was a bit of a closer fight, but Silva was certainly in the driver's seat the whole fight and landed some really beautiful spinning elbows on the retreat in that matchup. And against Charles Jourdain, he was able to put the lights out in the second round with that huge overhand right that we know and love from John Silva. Honestly, John Silva kind of reminds me a lot of Vanderlei Silva in a way. The way that he looks, first off, he has like the bald head with the, like the beard, and I don't know, just like the shape of his face, he kind of looks like Vanderlei, but in his style for sure, where Vanderlei would, swing these wild hooks. John Silva certainly has that similar style, but it's more like he's throwing one really, really sharp hook, maybe two or three after that, but, Vanderlei would swarm with, five or six. But yeah, I think the closest comparison to a legend that we've seen before would be like a Vanderlei Silva, just in terms of explosiveness and just insane power coming from John Silva. So very excited to see where that guy goes. Another very hot prospect coming out of the Fighting Nerds. And next, last but not least, or not last but not least, but the penultimate fighter that we're going to be talking about today is Carlos Prates. Coming off of his recent knockout victory over Neil Magny, Carlos Prates is the hardest hitter out of the group, I would say. He has that like one-touch death power, where it looks like, and forgive me for the lofty comparison, but very similar to Alex Pereira in a sense, because he is throwing these punches and it doesn't look like he's putting much steam behind them. It doesn't look like he's, really even like turning his hip into a lot of them or turning over the shoulder. But when he touches these guys, they go to sleep. Like the dude has earth-shattering power, insane, like just that one-touch death power, you know what I mean? Very similar to Pereira, Rumble in a sense. The list goes on and on of guys that, look like they don't hit that hard, but then whenever they touch people, they go to sleep. Scary in that sense. He's also similar to Pereira in his build. He's very long and lanky for the weight class. He fights at 170 at welterweight. Just getting that knockout victory over Neil Magny, a guy who is honestly not hard or not easy to knock out like that. And the way that he knocked him out, it was a shot right on the temple of Magny as Magny turned away. And a lot of people thought it was like a rigged knockout or like Magny took the fall, which is just bullshit. It reminds me of the Andre Arlovski versus Paul Buonatello knockout where only the referee saw it in real time, and then when they showed the replay, the crowd was like, "Oh shit!" Like he really did knock him out. But yeah, so Carlos Prates has a very clean calf kick. He has nice straight punches. He throws that right hand with impunity. And he can get a little wild sometimes, similar to John Silva. He can get a little wild, throw himself out of his stance. But generally, he has very clean technique, Prates. I think he's a bit of a slow starter. But Neil Magny in his last fight came out really aggressive. It was very unorthodox or, not what we expect from Neil Magny. And I think it took Prates a little bit by surprise, but he was still able to find that knockout in the first round, so it is what it is. So yeah, Prates is now in the top 15 at welterweight, and I think, 2-3 fights in 2024, and we could see, or in 2025, and we could see him fighting for the belt by the end of the year, if not the beginning of next year. Last but not least, in my opinion, the best fighter coming out of the Fighting Nerds, and the guy who's kind of been the flagship, the the pole bearer, whatever you want to call it, the guy who has carried the flag through the UFC so far for the Fighting Nerds is Caio Borralho. Caio Borralho, I've talked about him on this podcast since I've started the podcast. As soon as I saw him fight in the Contender Series, I was like, man, this guy is fucking good. Like, not only does he have really good power and really good grappling, he's very good at knowing when and where to use his tools. He's super high fight IQ. In my opinion, very high fight IQ. The highest fight IQ out of any of the Fighting Nerds guys that we've mentioned so far. Um, the big tools that he has are fundamentals, honestly. He has a phenomenal jab. He uses it very well. He can use it moving forward. He can use it moving backwards. Great timing on his double leg, on any of his tools, honestly. He has great timing. He knows when and where to place them. But his grappling is really his strong suit, I think. That being said, he has a very similar record, knockouts and submissions alike. So he can really take the fight anywhere, man. And something that I think is a very important facet to his skill set is that he is not afraid to win a decision. I think a lot of times fighters will fall into the trap of wanting to be exciting, wanting to be finishers. And it's really the greatest fighters in the world who are okay to just win the round. They're okay to just, not let the crowd get to them, win the round, win the fight. And if the finish presents itself, then they take it for sure. But if not, they're not going to force it. Guys like John Jones, guys like GSP, guys like Mighty Mouse. I would put Caio Borralho in that sphere, in the sphere of those kind of guys. Certainly of the GSP, Mighty Mouse, Valentina Shevchenko variety, where they have such a well-rounded skill set that they use their opponent's weaknesses against them. So if Caio Borralho is fighting a striker, he's going to grapple them. If he's fighting a grappler, he's going to strike him, et cetera, et cetera. The list goes on and on. I've assembled a small compilation of every time that I've picked Borralho in the UFC, aka every one of his fights. And I think that the preview that I give of his skill set is very accurate. Nothing that I haven't just mentioned, but you can see with the timestamps that this is somebody that we've been talking about for a long time.
Caio Borralho is a guy I'm really hot on right now. He's a hot prospect. He seems to have a super well-rounded game, good power on the feet, and a studied grappling game. You love to see that kind of balance in people's arsenals. He hasn't lost in a long time. His only professional loss came in his second pro fight, so he's been undefeated for effectively 7 years now. But you can see him use that grappling in his UFC fights. He uses his striking mostly as a means to that grappling path. He likes to mix it up, throw like a good left hook. He has a good right straight as well. Solid fundamentals on the feet, and then we'll take it to the ground and dominate from there usually. But I do think Caio will be too much for him over the distance, and I can see Borralho winning a decision here. I wouldn't be surprised if Borralho gets a submission, but I do like the decision money. So I'll be taking Borralho in this matchup. Another guy that we want to talk about here is Caio Borralho. We've discussed him on the pod before. Big fans of Caio. He's got an awesome, well-rounded game plan, but his jiu-jitsu is really where he butters his bread. His pace and his cardio as well are great tools for him. He's fighting Abus Magomedov. It certainly seems like Abus has a lot of cardio problems. I think that's something that Caio Borralho is going to be very smart to exploit. You look at his record, a lot of his finishes come in the second round, third round, you know what I mean? Early in his career, obviously, getting guys out of there in the first round, but I think that just kind of happens when you're first starting out and you have this kind of talent. In his UFC career, he's much more the type of guy to wear somebody down, and I just don't think that spells very well for Abus. I'm going to go with Borralho here, probably by submission, if not just by finish in the second or third. I can definitely see him getting Magomedov out of there. Borralho has shown to, be able to finish guys and beat up guys who have a very similar skill set to Abus. So, I saw Borralho use a lot of pressure and a lot of, jiu-jitsu and wrestling and just general pace to smother the kicking game of Muradov. And I think he's going to be smart to use that same kind of game plan here against Abus. He's fighting the prospect that we've been covering damn near since we started this pod, Caio Borralho, who's got that very well-rounded game. Started off on the regional scene as a grappler and kind of made his case as a striker in the UFC, but still has that grappling in his back pocket. He's used it to his advantages before in the UFC against guys like Armen Petrosian, against I forget who his last fight was. I want to say it was Muradov in his last fight. He was able to use that wrestling in that fight too, and just really control it. I think this is a good fight for him. Oleksiejczuk is a tough out, and he hits really hard, but his grappling has always been his weakness. If Borralho does get on top, I expect him to play a very safe game. I don't know if this fight's going to be that exciting. I think it's going to be a very interesting matchup, but I can definitely see potential for it to be a snoozer if Borralho can just, use his weapons to control Oleksiejczuk on the floor. He might be able to find a submission in the second or third round, but I can definitely see him just riding out that decision victory.
We love Borralho. He's great. The dude is very well-rounded, very smart fighter. And, you'll see him strike grapplers and grapple strikers, which is something that the best of the best do very well. Guys like GSP, guys like John Jones, guys like Jose Aldo, who, they have a very well-rounded, Valentina Shevchenko, the list goes on and on. These people who have a great, well-rounded game, who use their tools to exploit their opponent's weaknesses. I know it sounds very simplistic, but that is ultimately what is going to win you championships in MMA, what's going to make you a long-reigning fighter. And that's something that we picked up on Borralho very early, and I expect him to, use that in this fight. I think Borralho is smart, so I don't think he's going to even test the grappling of Paul Craig. I expect him to keep this fight on the feet, and he might be able to find a knockout at some point, but I think much more likely, as we've seen in Borralho's fights, he's happy to win the fight by decision if he can. He doesn't need to go for the finish. Similar to how we were talking earlier about Vitor Petrino, where Borralho has all the tools to finish the fight for sure, but if you aren't going to give it to him on a platter, he's okay to just win a fight, you know what I mean? And I think that's a great quality to have in a up-and-coming prospect. So I expect Borralho to win this fight for sure. But I can see Borralho kind of taking a volume approach to this fight, staying on the outside, popping out that jab, throwing those leg kicks, hitting the body. I think it's going to be a very exciting matchup, and I am leaning towards Caio Borralho here. I think the young gun can get it done. And honestly, I'm backing Borralho all the way to the top. I think the guy has a very awesome style, and he hasn't lost in a long time. And I think that's for a good reason. I think he's very smart when it comes to this fight game, and he knows not to take the risk if he doesn't have to, and he knows when to take the risk when it presents itself. So I like Borralho in this matchup. I think Cannonier is on the downturn. I think Borralho is on the up, and the momentum is certainly on Borralho's side, so I'm going to side with the Brazilian in the main event here. And I will be very surprised if he ends his career not ever gaining the belt. Right now, he is top 5 in middleweight, just having beat up Jared Cannonier and almost getting the knockout in that 5th round. I'll be very surprised if he's not fighting for a belt by the end of 2025. There's a lot to shake out at the top of middleweight, so it's not out of the realm of possibility if he doesn't get there, but it won't be by him losing, in my opinion. I think it'll be by just, people needing time off or getting injured, that kind of thing. But, mark my words, Caio Borralho will be a champion in the UFC one day, and one day soon, honestly. Probably 2025, if not 2026. So that kind of wraps up my preview for the Fighting Nerds overview. I just wanted to shine a light on this team. I think it's very fun that we have a new mixed martial arts team kind of taking the sport by storm, if you will. And I think all these fighters have some really interesting things that they bring to the table and some really, fun fights ahead of them. I'm not sure that Mauricio, Ruffy, and John Silva will ever reach the pinnacle of the sport, but they have the tools and natural athleticism to certainly do that. It's just a matter of if they can get there. For Carlos Prates, I'm sure that he can get there. It's just going to take a couple more years because welterweight is a very stacked division. And for Caio Borralho, I'd be incredibly surprised if he never touches gold. I can see him being a champion for a very long time. So shout out to the Fighting Nerds team. Thank you very much for watching and listening. I appreciate you guys. We couldn't do this show without you. I just wanted to give you a nice little something to digest in this time off. Talk about this amazing team that's fighting out of Brazil right now. Thank you very much for listening and watching, and we'll catch you guys in the next one. Hopefully, we'll catch the next team or group of prospects that are going to take us to the top of the sport. I appreciate y'all. Thank you very much. Much love, and take it easy, huh?